It is the night of July 4th, 1943. A silence pregnant with tension has fallen over the Russian steppe. The summer air is thick, heavy with the smell of dry grass, engine oil, and the expectation of imminent violence. In the darkness, hundreds of thousands of men hold their breath, knowing that dawn will bring hell with it. On the German side, inside the turret of a brand new Panther tank, Lieutenant Klaus adjusts his sights. Morale is extraordinarily high. He and his men are the spearhead of Operation Citadel, the most powerful offensive the Wehrmacht has ever assembled. Around him, hidden under camouflage nets, the new supertanks stretch as far as the eye can see. The steel beasts with which Hitler has promised to crush the Red Army once and for all. Klaus feels the power of his machine. The long 75mm cannon, the sloped armor, the Maybach engine purring beneath him. They have been told they are invincible, that no Soviet tank can stand against them. They are about to deliver the death blow, to sever the Kursk salient and annihilate 1 million enemy soldiers. They firmly believe they are about to win the war. A few kilometers away, on the Soviet side, Sergeant Dmitri lies at the bottom of a deep trench. He feels not the arrogance of his enemy, but the cold, patient determination of a man defending his home. He and his comrades are not waiting in ignorance. They know everything. They know about the Panther and Tiger tanks. They know the exact date and time of the attack. Around him, the earth itself has been turned into a weapon. Miles upon miles of minefields, hidden under a thin layer of soil. Nests of anti-tank guns, buried up to their barrels, forming deadly fields of fire. Hundreds of thousands of men like him, waiting in a labyrinth of 8 defensive lines that stretch for 250 kilometers. The silence of the night is not a silence of peace. It is the silence of a continental-scale steel trap, carefully set and about to spring shut. While Lieutenant Klaus dreams of victory and glory, Sergeant Dmitri checks the ammunition for his anti-tank rifle one last time, whispers a prayer, and waits. The coming clash will not be a battle, it will be a cataclysm. After the humiliating defeat at Stalingrad, the Third Reich desperately needed a decisive victory on the Eastern Front to reassert its power. The opportunity seemed to present itself in the spring of 1943 after Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, in a brilliant counterattack, recaptured the city of Kharkov. This victory created a massive salient in the Soviet line around the city of Kursk. For the German High Command, this salient was an irresistible temptation. The plan, christened Operation Citadel, was a classic pincer movement, an encirclement maneuver on a gigantic scale. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge's 9th Army would attack from the north, while Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, the elite force of Manstein's Army Group South, would attack from the south. The objective was to meet east of Kursk, trapping over 60 Soviet divisions in a colossal cauldron. If successful, the operation would not only annihilate a substantial part of the Red Army, but also shorten the front line, freeing up German divisions for other theaters of war. But the mentality behind the plan was flawed by a technological arrogance. Hitler had become obsessed with the new weapons emerging from his factories. The Tiger Ward heavy tank, with its formidable 88mm gun, and the new Panther medium tank, designed specifically to outperform the Soviet T-34, were seen as miracle weapons, capable of breaking any defense. This blind faith in technology led to a fatal delay. Hitler postponed the offensive, originally planned for May, for nearly 2 months, waiting for enough Panther tanks to be produced and delivered. He failed to understand that each day of delay not only strengthened his own armies, but gave his enemy, an enemy who now knew exactly what was coming, precious time to prepare. Manstein, Germany's most brilliant strategist, opposed this massive frontal assault. He advocated for an elastic defense, allowing the Soviets to attack first, wear themselves out, and then be destroyed in a textbook counterattack. But Hitler, seduced by the idea of a battle of annihilation, overruled him. Manstein was forced to execute a plan that violated his own principles of maneuver warfare. Meanwhile, on the Soviet side, the time granted by Hitler was used with terrifying efficiency. Thanks to an unparalleled espionage network, the Lucy Ring in Switzerland, and constant aerial reconnaissance, the Stavka knew every detail of Operation Citadel. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the enforcer of Stalin's will, oversaw the creation of the greatest fortress in history. Hundreds of thousands of civilians and soldiers worked day and night. They dug thousands of kilometers of trenches. They planted over 1 million mines, creating an unprecedented density of 1,500 anti-tank mines for every kilometer of front. They built hundreds of fortified command posts and prepared killing fields for thousands of anti-tank guns, positioned to create deadly crossfire ambushes. The Kursk salient was transformed into a monstrous defensive hedgehog, a meat grinder designed to bleed the elite of the German armored force dry. The true turning point of the Battle of Kursk was not a clash of tanks or an infantry charge. It was a strategic decision made in the silence of a Kremlin bunker, weeks before the first shot was fired. It was an intellectual debate that would decide the fate of the war in the East. Within the Soviet High Command, opinions were divided. Some prominent generals, emboldened by the victory at Stalingrad, argued for launching a preemptive strike. They wanted to hit first, disrupt the German troop concentrations, and seize the initiative. It was an aggressive strategy, in line with traditional Red Army doctrine. But Georgy Zhukov, along with other key strategists like Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, championed a radically different idea, an idea that went against all offensive instincts. His argument was simple and lethal. We know exactly where, when, and how the enemy will attack. Why don't we let them? Zhukov proposed a strategy of deliberate, elastic defense. The plan was to absorb the blow, to let the powerful German panzer divisions, with their fearsome new tanks, drive into their defensive labyrinth, to channel them into the minefields, into the fire sacks of the anti-tank artillery, to let them smash themselves against successive lines of defense, wearing down their equipment, consuming their fuel, exhausting their crews, to break their fangs and claws. And most crucially, while the enemy's best units bled to death in this trap, the Soviet High Command would keep a massive strategic reserve hidden, an entire steppe front, with over 500,000 men and 1,500 tanks, waiting fresh and intact behind the defensive lines. Only when the German offensive had lost all its momentum, only then, would this force be unleashed in a devastating counterattack that would not just stop the enemy, but annihilate him. It was a monumental gamble. It required iron patience and the will to cede ground, something Stalin found very difficult to accept. But Zhukov's logic was flawless. He convinced Stalin that this defensive strategy was not only the safest, but the one that promised the most decisive result. The decision to wait, to lure the beast into the trap instead of going out to hunt it, was the stroke of genius that sealed the fate of Operation Citadel. The stage was set for the greatest defensive battle in history, a battle that would change the course of humanity. Before we dive into the steel inferno of Kursk, if you appreciate the depth of this historical analysis, we invite you to subscribe and like. Your support allows us to continue unearthing these crucial stories. Now, back to the steppe, where the dawn of July 5th is about to break. 3 hours before dawn on July 5th, the Soviets played their first card. Knowing the exact hour of the German attack, they unleashed a massive preemptive artillery bombardment on the Wehrmacht's concentration areas. Thousands of guns roared, sowing confusion, causing casualties, and sending a clear message: we were waiting for you. The psychological shock on the German side was profound. Despite the initial chaos, the German offensive began. In the north, Marshal Model's Ninth Army launched itself against the defenses of Konstantin Rokossovsky's Central Front. The advance became a nightmare from the very first moment. The Tiger tanks, though superior, were too few. The new Panthers, in their baptism of fire, suffered catastrophic mechanical failures. Dozens were disabled by engine and transmission problems before even entering combat. The panzer formations found themselves trapped in the dense minefields, which separated the tanks from their supporting infantry. Immobilized and isolated, they became easy targets for the Soviet anti-tank guns, hidden in perfectly camouflaged positions. Rokossovsky, who had correctly predicted the main axis of attack, had concentrated his defenses there. Model's advance was measured in meters, not kilometers, and every meter was paid for with a terrible price in blood and steel. Within days, the northern pincer had failed. In the south, the story was different. Manstein's pincer, with the formidable 4th Panzer Army and its elite SS Corps, had more firepower and faced more favorable terrain. They managed to penetrate deeper into the defenses of General Vatutin's Voronezh front. But even here, the advance was an agony. The Germans employed their Panzerkeil tactic, the tank wedge, with the indestructible Tigers at the tip to break through. But the Soviet defenses were too deep, too dense. For every line they broke, another appeared, just as strong. The panzers were channeled into valleys and ravines that became fire sacks, where they were ambushed from three sides by entire batteries of anti-tank guns. The Su-152s, nicknamed Zveroboy or Beast Hunter, proved lethal. Their 152mm shells capable of tearing the turrets clean off the Tigers. The climax of the southern offensive and of the entire battle came on July 12th near a small village called Prokhorovka. The 30th SS Panzer Corps, the most powerful formation in the entire German army, launched what they believed would be the final assault to break the Soviet defenses. What they found was the 5th Guards Tank Army, which had been thrown into a desperate counterattack. What followed was the largest and most brutal tank battle in history. Hundreds of armored vehicles clashed on a chaotic, dust-choked battlefield. It was a close-quarters fight. The Soviet T-34 tanks, knowing they could not compete with the Tigers at long range, charged at full speed, seeking to close the distance to negate the enemy's range advantage. The battle became a savage melee. Tanks rammed into each other, firing point blank. The crews of destroyed tanks who managed to escape fought with pistols and grenades. The air was filled with the clang of metal on metal, deafening explosions, and the black smoke of burning vehicles. By the end of the day, the field of Prokhorovka was a graveyard of steel. The Soviets suffered terrible losses, losing hundreds of tanks, but they had achieved their objective. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, though it had inflicted more damage than it had received, was left exhausted, decimated, and incapable of continuing the advance. Manstein's spearhead had been broken. Operation Citadel was dead. On July 13th, while the fields of Prokhorovka were still burning, Hitler summoned Manstein and Kluge to his headquarters in East Prussia. The news he gave them was a devastating blow. Operation Citadel was cancelled. Manstein, believing he was on the verge of victory and that Soviet reserves were exhausted, a completely erroneous assessment, protested vehemently. He begged to be allowed to continue the fight. But Hitler's decision was not based on the situation at Kursk. It was based on news coming from the Mediterranean. On July 10th, Allied forces had landed in Sicily. Hitler, in a strategic panic, ordered that elite units, including the battered the 2 SS Panzer Corps, be immediately withdrawn from the Kursk front and sent to Italy. The order was final. The greatest German offensive of the war ended not with a victory or a decisive defeat, but with a whimper. But the end of the German offensive was not the end of the Battle of Kursk. It was, in fact, only the end of the first act. Now, with the German forces exhausted, their elite armored divisions decimated, and their reserves committed, Stalin and Zhukov unleashed true hell. On July 12th, the same day as the Battle of Prokhorovka, the Red Army launched Operation Kutuzov, a massive offensive against the northern flank of the salient where Model's already battered 9th Army was crushed. Within weeks, Soviet forces liberated the city of Orel and pushed the Germans back hundreds of kilometers. Then, on August 3rd, the second act of Soviet vengeance began. Operation Rumyantsev, the fresh and powerful steppe front, the strategic reserve that Zhukov had so carefully guarded, was launched against Manstein's weakened Army Group South. The German defenses, without their elite panzer divisions, disintegrated. The cities of Belgorod and, symbolically, Kharkov were liberated. These two counteroffensives were the real slaughter. It was here that the Wehrmacht was shattered. The forces that Hitler and Himmler had ordered not to yield a single meter were now in a desperate retreat along a front hundreds of kilometers long. The Soviets had not just defended Kursk, they had used the German offensive as an anvil upon which they hammered and destroyed the best formations of the Third Reich, before launching an offensive that opened the way to the Dnieper River and the heart of Ukraine. The taking of 400 kilometers was not an exaggeration. It was the bloody reality of the summer of 1943. The Battle of Kursk officially ended on August 23, 1943, with the liberation of Kharkov. The Red Army had not only contained Germany's last great summer offensive, but had pushed the front hundreds of kilometers to the west, far beyond the starting lines of July. The map of the Eastern Front had been changed forever. Losses on both sides were monumental, reflecting the scale and ferocity of the fighting. Germany suffered around 200,000 casualties and lost nearly 500 of its best tanks and assault guns. These were not just material losses. They were the most experienced crews, the elite of the armored arm, who could never be replaced. Soviet losses, as in many battles in the East, were far greater in absolute terms. They suffered over 860,000 casualties and the staggering loss of more than 6,000 tanks. The figures are a testament to the sacrifice the Red Army was willing to make to achieve victory. The crucial difference was that the Soviet Union, with its vast population and relocated industrial production, could absorb these losses. Germany could not. Kursk was the death sentence for the Blitzkrieg. The battle destroyed the offensive capability of the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. The Panzerwaffe, the armored arm that had terrorized Europe since 1939, was left broken and irremediably weakened. Never again would the German army be able to dictate the pace of the war in the East. From this moment on, the strategic initiative passed finally and irrevocably to the Red Army. From the summer of 1943 until the fall of Berlin in the spring of 1945, the German army would be in a continuous strategic retreat. It would be a long and bloody 2-year struggle, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Battle of Kursk was not just a victory of brute force and numbers, but also of strategic intellect. It was the victory of precise intelligence, meticulous planning, and iron patience over technological arrogance and rigid strategy. It enshrined commanders like Zhukov and Rokossovsky in the pantheon of history's great military leaders and proved that the Red Army had transformed into a sophisticated and lethal fighting force. In the vast wheat fields of Kursk, the Wehrmacht did not just lose a battle, it lost the war.